As I'm sure most of you have heard at this point, former President Donald Trump had 6 years of his tax returns released by Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee. The Democrats have been trying to do this for over 4 years now, and what was their justification? Well, as CNN reports, Chairman Richard Neal and fellow Democrats have said that the records obtained showed that the presidential audit program failed to work as intended. Neal, a Massachusetts Democrat, charged that the complete required audit of Trump's taxes did not occur, and his returns were only subjected to the mandatory audit once in 2019 after the Democrats inquired. And what has been the big takeaway here? Well, this story is in flux, and we'll probably continue to learn things as time passes. But the one unforgivable sin that Donald Trump committed, according to the Young Turks at least, is that he didn't give nearly enough of his money to the federal government.
The most important thing is going to really surprise you. It turns out, and we double checked this, he wasn't paying much in taxes for multiple years.
Now, I personally don't see the big deal here. I'm no fan of the former president, but I suspect that, like most Americans, me included, Donald Trump tries to pay as little in taxes as possible. So first off, when covering this story, the Young Turks rather predictably did some terrible reporting, in that they botched basic details. Cenk and John are real upset that Donald Trump won't be punished for his crimes detailed here.
There's only one thing that's a downer, which is, will he ever be prosecuted for any of this? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Of course not. Rich people are allowed to break the law in America. Welcome to the country if you don't realize that.
But if you really want to demonstrate that he's not above the law, have the law actually apply to him. This is disclosure. I think that's good. Disclosure, he's not above disclosure, but he's not in jail for the crimes he's committed. So let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Now, maybe I missed it, but what crimes was he even accused of committing here? Like I said earlier, this is a developing story. It may well be that we find out he did something illegal. But last I checked, paying a small amount of income taxes in years where you lost money isn't a crime. It's also just not true that Donald Trump didn't pay that much in taxes. As the Young Turks often point out, it's not just income taxes that you pay in the United States.
They all say, oh, the poor don't pay anything. That's not true. So they're only talking about the income tax because that's convenient. But there's actually tons of taxes all over the place. One that you'll all know is the sales tax.
And they're not wrong. Most Americans pay a large amount of money in taxes in a number of different ways. This is true for Donald Trump as well. As Ryan Ellis, an IRS enrolled agent, writes at National Review, from the years 2015 through 2020, Trump paid federal profit and other, for example, self-employment, household employer, etc., taxes every single year. The best indicator of tax liability for a taxpayer is the total line tax, which accounts for both federal and income tax, and all the things that proxy for federal income tax on a 1040. In the years released, Trump had a cumulative total tax of $4.4 million. This ranged from a low of $285,000 in 2017 to a high of $2.1 million in 2018. Again, he had a total tax liability every single year. During this same period, Trump reported a negative adjusted gross income, AGI, a majority of the years. AGI is the best measurement of profit when evaluating a taxpayer. It's the denominator to the total tax numerator. What's important to note is that even in the years where Trump had massive negative AGI numbers, he still had a total tax liability. For example, in 2016, his AGI was negative $32.4 million, but his total tax that year was over $600,000. How was that possible? That year, he owed $750,000 in federal income tax proper, but he also owed $439,000 in self-employment tax, $45,000 in household employer or nanny tax, and $130,000 in Obamacare Medicare tax. All of these add up to his total tax that year. So yeah, it's not like Donald Trump didn't pay anything in taxes. Now, I understand that they think Donald Trump didn't pay enough in taxes. As far as the Young Turks are concerned, that's our money he has that is at best on temporary loan to him. TYT is hardly unique in this perspective, and while I certainly don't agree, I don't intend to adjudicate that matter here. Nor do I care that they think this proves Donald Trump is a lousy businessman. Cenk also says that this shows that Donald Trump lied about his net worth.
Today he attached an article from Forbes as he was raging about this. saying that his net worth is $4 billion. Why? Because the returns show you he isn't anywhere near a billionaire, right? So he's like, oh yeah, I once tricked Forbes into saying that I've had $4 billion. Ha ha, gotcha. No, not got you. We see your taxes. Where's the money, Lebowski?
Except this is just sloppy commentary, as total net worth is not shown on tax returns. Net worth is not nearly as clear-cut as total income earned, especially in Donald Trump's case, as much of his net worth is tied up in his brand, and Donald Trump's brand is largely an abstraction. How much does putting Donald Trump's name on something add value to it? You'll get very different answers to that question depending on who you ask. I also understand that TYT wants to see more tax records from more public officials as a good governance transparency effort.
Release Bernie's taxes. Release Ilhan Omar's taxes. Release all of them. They are public servants. If they're getting rich off of us, if they're breaking the law, if they're skirting the law, if they're using insider information, I want us to know that regardless of the letter that comes before their name.
Again, they're hardly unique in this. It's usually tradition for presidential candidates to make these disclosures with that in mind. Trump famously bucked this tradition, lying that he was under audit, and won in 2016 anyways. It's worth asking, has this tradition actually prevented any presidential corruption? Personally, I'm skeptical. The thing is, the Young Turks and many others say that the fundamental problems of corrupt governance in America are systemic.
Oh my, how could you question the fact that I've taken all these corporate donations throughout my entire career, that would influence me? All of this money that the health insurance companies and the drug companies have given me, well, I'm such an angel that would never affect me. Okay, that's what you're saying. And I think that a lot of Americans, in fact, 96% of Americans think that corporate money corrupts politics.
Yes.
And not in a personal way. Michael Bennett's not at all a bad guy in person, right? But in a systematic way, in a systemic way. It's systemic corruption.
I don't necessarily think they're wrong about this. I probably disagree with how these systemic problems manifest themselves and what the best solutions are. But bad incentives are a far bigger problem than bad people. We've always had bad people and we always will. That cannot be fixed. However, good people usually only do bad, dishonest things when the right incentives are in place. That's a much bigger problem. TYT thinks that adding greater transparency to the tax filings of important, powerful people will go a long way in fixing these incentives, but they're failing to anticipate the downsides of doing this. A lot of online leftists, including people at TYT, get all worked up about data collection and surveillance from our intelligence agencies, and they're concerned about the various ways this can be weaponized.
Perhaps your surveillance nonstop annoys us, like that 2-minute interaction drove you bonkers, right? Well, the whole country's being driven bonkers, but you constantly looking into every goddamn thing we're doing when we're not the goddamn terrorists.
They're not wrong to be concerned about this. What they fail to consider is that the IRS rivals our intelligence agencies when it comes to data collection. It's the start of a new year, and if you live in the United States, as most of my audience does, you'll be doing your taxes in the coming months. When you do, be mindful of all the questions you're answering and all the information you're handing over. The IRS wants to know if you have a mortgage and how much interest you've paid on it. And if you own a home, you must tell them how you use it. For example, do you have a home office or do you rent a room to someone? Also, they'll need to know what you paid in property taxes and private mortgage insurance. The IRS also needs to know your family structure. Are you married with children, or dependents as the taxman calls them? And if you claim them, you'll need to fork over details about their lives too. The IRS will also need to know about your finances. Any bank accounts you have or other financial vehicles you may have earned interest or collected dividends off of, as you may need to pay taxes on those as well. The IRS will also need to know about your health insurance and if you have a health savings account. HSA spending is notorious for attracting audits, and should that happen, you'll have to provide information on what you spent that money on. This is only scratching the surface. There are far more details of your life you'll have to fill out if you want to reduce your tax burden, or if you fail to report, you may get in trouble. Every year, there are 1.4 million audits conducted by the IRS. If you underpay the government, you will have to pay what you owe with interest. If you fail or refuse to pay, you'll have to go to tax court, where the conviction rate is over 90%, and the average conviction includes 2 years of jail time. Who do you think is more likely to face these consequences? A politically well-connected billionaire or a normal person? Also, who is better equipped to deal with the IRS? The answer to both these questions should be obvious. The fact of the matter is, the IRS is way more likely to harass your average American than the FBI or the NSA is. The extraordinary thing is, when it comes to taxes on people they don't like, the folks over at TYT apply arguments that they would never accept when it comes to intelligence agencies.
If your taxes being released can destroy you, that's a you problem, not a me problem, I think at that point. What the hell are you hiding in there? You're gonna look at what's on my hard drive, that could destroy me. Then I should not have that stuff on my hard drive, I think personally is how I would. I think you're telling on yourself.
As I said earlier, you can tell a lot about someone just by looking at their financial records. There's a reason why so many of our intelligence agencies track the finances of criminal organizations. They can be used to spy on the activities of these organizations and make it more difficult for them to operate. There's also a reason why it's a felony to release someone's tax records illegally. It contains information that the person, even if you're not engaged in criminal or immoral activities, might want to keep private. It's no different than not wanting people to see your medical records, as far as I'm concerned. Furthermore, a lot of this is a problem of their own making. The tax code is one of TYT's favorite tools of social engineering. They want to engage in economic planning by proxy, by distorting prices with tariffs or tax breaks and credits to favorable industries. They want to use the tax code as a corrective measure for supposed societal ills like income inequality. And now, they want to use it as a means of political discipline against one of their political opponents. It never seems to have occurred to them that the levers of power, at some point, will inevitably land in the hands of someone with a different enemies list, and that these people might use the power of the IRS against someone on their enemies list. And yes, that includes media outlets. There is nothing hypothetical about this. Paul Motzko documents one of the more well-known instances of the IRS being weaponized for political purposes in his book, The Radio Right. President Kennedy was eager to leverage his newfound power against the burgeoning right-wing radio movement that had been critical of him during the 1960 election. As Motzko writes, President Kennedy knew that these broadcasters posed a serious and growing threat to his legislative goals and to his hopes of re-election in 1964. Within weeks of his inauguration, the administration had already begun planning for his re-election campaign. Robert F. Kennedy, the new U.S. Attorney General and the president's brother, met with labor union leaders Walter and Victor Reuther multiple times in 1961 to discuss campaign strategy. Robert Kennedy tasked the Reuther brothers with a special mission: find a way to undermine the threat posed by this new political force that had come seemingly out of nowhere, the extreme right wing. By the end of 1961, the Reuthers hand-delivered a 24-page document titled The Radical Right in America Today, better known as the Reuther Memorandum. The Kennedy White House would implement each of the major planks of the Reuther Plan, using the Internal Revenue Service to target conservative broadcasters with audits and the Federal Communications Commission to selectively enforce regulations for radio stations airing right-wing programs. After John F. Kennedy's assassination, the Democratic National Committee picked up the baton and used similar tactics to harass Goldwater supporters in the summer of 1964. Cenk and everyone else at TYT talk about how the right wing demonizes people like immigrants and the LGBT community.
It's all theatrics to appease a hateful right-wing base. Don't worry, we hate the immigrants. Oh, they're so brown. Well, we don't want those brown people in our state. We're gonna do the razor wires and we're gonna bust them out and we're gonna arrest them. But
did it ever occur to Cenk that the right wing might be in charge again at some point, and that they might use the IRS against their list of subversives? I think there's another explanation why TYT is cool with the IRS probing into Trump, though. The main reason, I think, is that the Young Turks have a big "it's okay when we do it" attitude. Whatever standards they hold others to, they're happy to abandon when it suits their purposes. TYT constantly complains about the media and the chummy relationship they have with politicians and industry.
Corporate media is owned by the same donors who corrupt the politicians. Okay? Stop expecting anything different.
That's what I'm trying to explain to folks.
They get it.
Yet Cenk used his own network, the network he's the CEO of, to advertise and raise money for his congressional campaign.
You can make that happen right now. Cenk2020.com. Let's go shock the world and show them something they've never seen before.
They also granted the same privilege to Nina Turner, who was actually on their payroll at the same time she was a registered congressional candidate.
So now the link that we had told you about and found before Senator Turner announced was ninaturner.com/hello for fundraising purposes, which is absolutely critical for a progressive running.
When it comes to media outlets having corporate advertisers, it's proof that they're manufacturing consent for corporate America. Except TYT has corporate advertisers, including a financial institution called Aspiration, which they actually had a 4-hour special for, encouraging their audience to set up accounts. Among other things, Aspiration offers mutual funds which invest money in companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Visa, Ameriprise, United Healthcare, Disney, Boeing, Halliburton, Monsanto, and a whole host of fossil fuel companies including Chevron, ExxonMobil, Chesapeake Energy, and even Gazprom. When someone in the media space gets their money from wealthy donors, the Young Turks accuse that person of being beholden to these donors. For example, they say that their former colleague Dave Rubin is a grifter who has opinions for hire. That's what Cenk literally told to Ross Anderson at Quillette. Except TYT has taken plenty of money from wealthy donors. Most notably the $20 million investment from Jeffrey Katzenberg, but they've also taken smaller amounts of money from other wealthy donors. For example, they got $25,000 from Joe Sandberg. Sandberg is one of the founders of Aspiration. Why doesn't this make TYT beholden to him? The Young Turks always talk a big game about how they're funded by their audience.
When you take the money from the giant corporate advertisers, in a sense, you owe them something, right? That's why we don't do it at the Young Turks. So when we take money from you guys, we owe you what we promise, which is honest reporting and fighting for positive change in the world.
And again, that's only partly true. But more importantly, when someone they don't like is funded by their audience, like Jimmy Dore, that person is a grifter who has fallen prey to audience capture.
But for Jimmy's grift to work, he's got to get the audience to give him money because billionaires aren't going to, right? So in order to get people really, really angry, you have to get them angry at the people they trust the most. So that's his angle.
Whenever they're confronted with these accusations, they basically respond by saying that these things don't happen to them. They only do corporate sponsorships for companies that already share their ethics.
You know, I want you guys to feel like if you're a supporter of TYT, it is synonymous to also be an Aspiration account holder.
And they only take big money from people they already agree with. Or they just have the fortitude not to give in to audience capture.
And by the way, I mean, we're not insulated from that either. We just don't fall victim to it because we're gonna say what we wanna say, right? So oftentimes we'll say things on the show, Cenk, that the audience doesn't like. Well, if you wanna be lied to, go somewhere else. But we're gonna tell you what our honest analysis is. It is what it is.
Basically, they throw around these accusations left, right, and center. Then when people throw these accusations at them, their response is, nuh-uh.
I think that maybe we're the unique ones. We care about principles and ideology and what is right and wrong, facts. And by the way, sometimes the facts don't go in the way that you expected because of your ideology. You still got to be honest about the facts. So whereas I think a lot of people in media are like Dave Rubin, where they think, yeah, but how does it affect me?
The thing is, whether you're talking about corruption in politics or the media, they say that this corruption is systemic, that it's not about personalities. Yet somehow, their virtue has enabled them to rise above these things and be a news organization that is for the people. This is having it both ways. Either these critiques apply to them, or they're not systemic. If they insist on setting up these rules, then they need to obey them themselves.
Of course!